friends, seekers of the depths, you come here today bearing a quiet question, one that does not shout but whispers from the very marrow of your soul. It is the question of the sensitive ones, the empaths, the bearers of the world's unseen moods. You ask, what becomes of me when I lay down the wearying mantle of the pleaser? When I cease to be a mere reflection in the eyes of others? Let us venture into this profound transformation, not as a simple act of rebellion, but as a sacred descent into the self. For decades, perhaps for a lifetime, you have lived in the outer court of the personality. The persona, this mask, skillfully crafted, has been your offering to the world. I am agreeable, it says. I am helpful. I require nothing. You have polished this mask until it shone, believing its gleam was your own. But a whisper from the depths has told you the truth. The mask is not the face. The map is not the territory. This compulsion to please, what is it, if not a primitive prayer to the outer world? A prayer for safety, for belonging, chanted at the altar of the collective. You have made your soul a vessel for the anxieties, expectations, and desires of others, until it became so heavy with foreign contents that your own essence was nearly lost. You became a kingdom governed by foreign powers. But the soul, in its profound wisdom, will not be silenced forever. It sends forth its emissaries in the guise of symptoms, a creeping exhaustion that sleep cannot cure, a resentment that blooms in the secret garden of the heart, a feeling of being a ghost in your own life. This is not a curse but a call. It is the self, your total, undivided being, demanding an audience. And so, you stop. In that moment of cessation, the world you have known may tremble. This is the first great initiation. Firstly, you will feel a profound disorientation. The compass you have used, the approval of others, has lost its magnetic north. You stand at the edge of the known world, and a terrifying, holy silence descends. This is the nihilistic void, the feeling of nothingness that precedes authentic creation. Do not flee from it, for it is in this void that you will hear, for the first time, the sound of your own voice. Then, you will meet the shadow, all that you repressed in your quest to be good. Your rightful anger, your healthy boundaries, your inconvenient needs, will rise from the depths. It will appear monstrous, for you have been taught to see it as such. But I implore you, do not turn away. Welcome this long-lost brother, for your anger holds the power of your no, which is the sacred guardian of your yas. Your so-called selfishness is the architect of your integrity. To make the shadow conscious is to reclaim your wholeness. As you integrate these dissound parts, a new strength is born, the capacity for conscious suffering. You will understand that to disappoint another is not a mortal sin, but often the necessary price of selfhood. You will choose the authentic ache of a temporary conflict over the soul, death of perpetual compliance. This is the birth of true responsibility, not for the feelings of others, but for the state of your own soul. And what emerges from this alchemical fire? You cease to be a mirror, and become a lamp. You no longer merely reflect the light of others' expectations, you generate your own light from within. Your sensitivity, once a wound through which the world poured in, becomes a sacred vessel. It is no longer used to gauge the moods of others, but to perceive the subtle truths of life, to create, to empathize from a place of choice, not compulsion. You will find your tribe not by pleasing them, but by resonating with them. The relationships that remain will be built on the solid ground of truth, not the shifting sands of appeasement. The goal of this arduous journey is not to become hard, callous, or indifferent. That would be a betrayal of your sensitive nature. The goal is individuation, to become who you truly are, a singular, unrepeatable expression of the cosmos. A sensitive soul armed with boundaries is one of the most powerful forces in the world. It feels deeply, but it is no longer flooded. It cares profoundly, but it is no longer enslaved. The persona, that intricate and necessary construct, is the face we put forward to meet the world. The very word, drawn from the ancient theater, means mask, and it is through this mask that the actor's voice is projected to the audience. So it is with us. From our earliest days, we learn that to be good is to be agreeable, that to be loved is to be useful, that to be safe is to be without sharp edges. Thus, the sensitive soul, more attuned to the subtle currents of emotion and expectation, becomes a master artisan of this mask. They sculpt it with exquisite care from the clay of others' approvals and disapprovals, polishing it with every smile of relief they see on a parent's face, every word of praise from a teacher, every sense of belonging gained from a peer. It becomes a masterpiece of social adaptation, so perfectly fitted and so often worn that one forgets it is not skin. One forgets the face beneath. This mask is not, in itself, the enemy. It is a vital tool for navigating the collective, a necessary garment for the marketplace and the social sphere. The peril arises not from its existence, but from the moment of identification, the moment the soul, gazing into the reflective surface of the world's opinion, mistakes the mask for its own true countenance. It whispers to itself, "I am this helpful one, this peaceful one, this one who never causes a ripple," and in that whispered lie, a profound self-betrayal is enacted. The individual begins to curate their inner world, not from the wellspring of their own nature, but from the catalogue of acceptable expressions offered by the tribe. They stifle a righteous anger, because it would crack the plaster of the kind mask. They swallow a creative impulse, because it does not suit the serious mask. They force a laughter they do not feel to maintain the happy mask. Every genuine, spontaneous, and often messy impulse from the depths of the psyche is sacrificed upon the altar of this artificial image. The soul becomes a house divided, with the conscious self living in the bright, orderly front room of the persona, while the true contents of the personality, the wildness, the sorrow, the power, the peculiar brilliance, are shoved into the dark and locked cellar of the unconscious, where they fester and gather strength, eventually threatening to break down the door. The weight of this inauthentic life is the weight of the mask itself, a constant, draining effort to hold a face that is not your own, until the muscles of the true face atrophy from disuse, and the soul grows weary from the performance of being everyone else's reflection, and no one's self. The call of the self is not a trumpet's blast from a sun-drenched battlement, it is rather a subterranean murmur, a disturbance in the deep strata of the psyche that first makes itself known as a symptom, a subtle crack in the flawless facade of the persona. It is the divine discontent that begins as a vague restlessness, a feeling of being a stranger in one's own life, of going through the motions in a play whose script one did not write. For the sensitive soul who has mastered the art of pleasing, this call is initially perceived not as an invitation, but as a failure to maintain the impeccable composure, to sustain the boundless generosity, to continue the self-effacing performance that has, until now, earned the currency of acceptance. The soul, in its profound and innate wisdom, recognizing that the conscious ego has become a captive of its own creation, must resort to indirect and often painful means to signal the need for course correction. Thus, it sends its emissaries in forms the ego cannot easily ignore. A profound and inexplicable fatigue descends, a weariness that no amount of physical sleep can alleviate, for it is the exhaustion of the spirit, the soul's protest against the endless energy expended in maintaining a fiction. There may arise a simmering resentment, a bitter taste at the back of the throat, when yet another demand is meekly accepted, a quiet fury that surprises the individual with its intensity, for this resentment is the voice of the trampled will, the oppressed kingdom finally stirring in revolt. There can be a sense of emptiness, of hollowness, as if one is merely a silhouette, a collection of reflexes designed to please, with no solid core within. Even the body may become an ally of the self, manifesting the internal conflict in a language of symptoms, a tightness in the throat that cannot speak its truth, a tension in the shoulders bowed under the weight of others' expectations, a fragility that seems to whisper of a structure built on sand. These are not, we must understand, signs of a psyche breaking down, but rather of a psyche struggling to break through. They are the birth pangs of a more authentic existence. The self, the total, archetypal midpoint of the personality, is not concerned with social harmony, it is concerned with wholeness. And it will orchestrate a crisis, a state of quiet desperation, to lure the ego away from the well-trodden path of compliance and toward the uncharted territory of its own depths. It is a summons to a pilgrimage that must be taken alone, a demand to turn away from the reflecting pool of others' opinions, and to gaze, however terrifyingly, into the well of the soul, where the true image of who one is meant to be has been waiting, all along, in the dark, silent waters. The descent into the void is the critical, unavoidable passage that follows the courageous act of laying down the persona. It is not a gentle transition but a visceral unraveling, a psychic death. When the sensitive soul finally ceases its endless external adjustments, the world it so carefully constructed does not merely fade, it collapses inward with a profound and deafening silence. This is the existential crisis, the encounter with the nihilistic vacuum that has always lurked beneath the surface of their busy nest to please. All the old landmarks vanish, the compass of external validation spins wildly, its needle pointing nowhere, for its magnetic pole was always located in the hearts of others. The soul finds itself in a formless, featureless inner landscape, a psychic bardo where the familiar scripts have been erased, and the comforting roles of the helper, the peacemaker, the agreeable one, no longer hold any meaning or power. This is a state of profound disorientation and terrifying freedom. The ego, which had identified so completely with its function in the social sphere, now feels itself to be nothing, a ghost, a vapor. The question, "Who am I?" ceases to be a philosophical inquiry and becomes a desperate, gut-wrenching cry into an apparent abyss. This is the dark night of the soul, where the warmth of collective approval has been withdrawn, and one is left shivering in the cold of one's own isolated consciousness. Every instinct screams to retreat, to scramble back to the shore, to retrieve the discarded mask and paste it back on, for even a painful identity feels preferable to no identity at all. Yet, it is precisely in this terrifying act of holding the void, of enduring the nothingness, that the alchemical work begins. For this vacuum is not truly empty, it has been purged of foreign contents, so that the native, authentic ones may germinate. It is the fertile darkness of the tomb before the resurrection, the unformed chaos before the cosmos. In the absolute quiet, stripped of the constant static of others' expectations, the soul begins, faintly at first, to hear its own intrinsic rhythms, the beat of its own heart, the whisper of its own desires, the subtle pull of its own unique destiny. This void is the womb of the true self. It is the blank canvas upon which the soul, for the first time, can paint its own image, not from a model provided by the collective, but from the archetypal blueprint hidden deep within its own core. To endure this descent is to pass the supreme test of courage, for it means trusting that something will eventually emerge from the nothingness, something more real and more durable than the pleasing fiction that was sacrificed. It is the journey into the belly of the whale, where the hero is dissolved so that they may be remade. The confrontation with the shadow is the inevitable and most fearsome consequence of having dared to step into the void, for when the bright, orderly facade of the persona is decommissioned, the psyche's balance is shattered, and the contents that were repressed for its maintenance now surge upward from the depths, demanding to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be integrated. This shadow is not a small or trivial thing, it is the entire unlived life, the sum total of all those qualities, impulses, and capacities that were deemed too sharp, too demanding, too messy, or too primal to fit within the narrow confines of the pleaser's mask. For the sensitive soul, this shadow is particularly potent, for it holds everything they were taught a good person must not be. It contains the rightful anger that was swallowed as bitterness, the healthy selfishness that was condemned as a sin, the sharp-edged truth that was filed down into a harmless platitude, the raw, unvarnished need that was hidden behind a performance of contentment. As these elements begin to rise, the conscious ego, still identifying with its old image of gentleness and compliance, perceives them as monstrous, as a foreign and hostile invasion threatening to destroy the very fabric of their character. This is the critical battleground, the moment where many turn back in terror, seeking refuge in the familiar prison of their persona. They mistake the shadow for the devil, when in truth, it is a disinherited part of their own soul, carrying not only darkness but also vital, untapped power. That rage, when integrated, becomes the unshakable capacity to set a boundary. That so-called selfishness transforms into the sacred act of self-preservation. That blunt honesty matures into unwavering integrity. The confrontation is not a battle to be won by annihilation, but a difficult, often painful negotiation to be undertaken, a reconciliation between the ego and its long-lost twin. One must learn to sit with this inner stranger, to listen to its grievances, to understand its origins, and to recognize that its very existence is a testament to a life half lived. It is the keeper of the soul's wholeness, and it will not be placated or dismissed. To make the shadow conscious is to cease projecting it onto others, to stop seeing the angry people or the selfish ones as wholly other, and to recognize those same capacities within oneself, awaiting their proper context and conscious application. This is not a descent into evil, but a reclaiming of one's full humanity. It is the alchemical nigredo, the blackening, where the base material of the personality is broken down and dissolved, not to be destroyed, but to have its essential gold extracted. The sensitive soul who successfully navigates this confrontation does not become a monster, they become whole. They integrate their steel without losing their softness, their fire without extinguishing their compassion. They become, for the first time, a complete person, capable of both kindness and ferocity, of generosity and fierce self-protection, a soul that has embraced its own full spectrum and in doing so has become truly and authentically formidable. Conscious suffering represents the great turning point, the fulcrum upon which the soul's destiny pivots from passive endurance to active, meaningful engagement with its own reality. It is the deliberate, excruciating, and ultimately liberating choice to exchange the chronic, soul-crushing agony of self-betrayal for the acute, clean pain of authenticity. For the sensitive soul, this is the core of the initiation. Their entire life has been a masterclass in avoiding the suffering of conflict, of disapproval, of being perceived as difficult or ungrateful. They have learned to navigate the world by absorbing the shocks and slings of reality into their own soft tissue, by making their psyche a shock absorber for the world, all to maintain a superficial peace that is, in truth, the peace of the cemetery. This is unconscious suffering, a heavy, vague, pervasive sense of dread and weariness, a feeling of being slowly dissolved in the mild acid of constant accommodation. It is a suffering without meaning, a passive victimhood to the expectations of the collective. But when the call of the self can no longer be ignored, a terrible and magnificent clarity dawns, that this passive suffering is a far greater torment than any active pain one might choose. Conscious suffering, then, is the willed decision to endure the sharp, specific, and temporary anguish of speaking a difficult truth, of drawing a boundary that may disappoint, of claiming a right that may provoke confusion or anger. It is to look directly into the eyes of a loved one and accept the fleeting shadow of hurt that crosses their face, not with schadenfreude, but with the sober understanding that this momentary discomfort is the necessary price for your own spiritual integrity. It is to hold the tension between your own soul's need and the world's demand, without collapsing one into the other. This is not an act of cruelty, it is the highest form of compassion for oneself, and paradoxically, for the other, as it invites them into a relationship with a real person, not a phantom. This conscious suffering is the fire that forges the will. It is the active, Promethean act of stealing the fire of one's own authority from the gods of tradition and collective opinion. Each time one chooses the clean wound of truth over the festering ulcer of compliance, a profound inner shift occurs. The soul, once soft and pliable, begins to grow a spine of steel. It learns that it can survive conflict, that it can endure disapproval, and that on the other side of that chosen pain lies a vast, open field of freedom. This is the suffering that transforms, that alchemizes the lead of a victimized psyche into the gold of a sovereign individual. It is the pain of birth, not of decay, and it is only by voluntarily embracing this fire that the sensitive soul discovers its true, unassailable strength. The strength not to be impervious to pain, but to choose which pains are worthy of enduring, and in that choice, to author their own destiny. The transition from mirror to lamp is the great and silent revolution that marks the culmination of the soul's arduous journey back to itself. For a lifetime, the sensitive psyche has functioned as a mirror of exquisite polish and clarity, its primary purpose to catch and reflect the light of those around it. Its value was measured by its fidelity to the images it projected, the agreeable son, the accommodating friend, the selfless partner. It learned to angle itself perfectly to avoid casting a shadow, to ensure that whoever gazed upon it saw only a comforting, pleasing, and ultimately flattering reflection of their own desires and expectations. This was an existence of pure reactivity, a subtle servitude to the external world, where the soul's own light remained dormant, unknown even to itself, like a sun perpetually in eclipse. But when the mirror is finally withdrawn, when the individual, having passed through the void and integrated the shadow, refuses to reflect what they are expected to reflect, a profound emptiness gives way to a slow, inner kindling. The energy that was once endlessly expended in the act of reflection now turns inward, circulating in the depths, gathering heat and potency. This is the genesis of the lamp. No longer a passive surface waiting to be illuminated by an external source, the soul becomes a source of illumination in its own right. It generates its own light from the fuel of its own lived experience, its own hard-won truths, its own integrated darkness and light. This lamp does not shine to please, it shines because it is its nature to shine. Its light is steady and constant, not flickering with every shift in the emotional atmosphere of the room. It casts its own unique spectrum, illuminating the world according to its own inherent design, revealing contours and depths that the flat, uniform light of the collective could never disclose. Where the mirror could only show others themselves, the lamp reveals the true nature of the territory it shines upon. It can cast light on injustice, illuminate beauty, and yes, create stark and necessary shadows. This is the birth of authentic creativity, of a voice that speaks not to echo, but to originate. The lamp soul empathizes not from a place of enmeshment and desperate concord, but from a grounded center, choosing to extend its light with wisdom and discernment. Relationships are no longer bonds of mutual reflection, but encounters between distinct sources of light, each respecting the other's unique radiance. The world, which once demanded a reflection, now receives a gift, the gift of a perspective that is singular, unrepeatable, and born of the depths. The sensitive soul has not lost its sensitivity, it has empowered it. It feels the world as keenly as ever, but it is no longer flooded by it. It perceives the pain of others, but it no longer feels obligated to sacrifice its own flame to appease the darkness. It has become a beacon, not a looking glass, and in this final transformation, it fulfills its highest purpose, not to show the world what it wants to see, but to illuminate what is truly there, and in doing so, to guide itself and others home. Individuation is not a destination one arrives at with fanfare and finality, but a continuous unfolding process of becoming. The slow, deliberate crystallization of the self out of the chaotic solution of the personality. It is the telos, the inherent goal buried deep within the acorn of the psyche, that presses it to become the singular oak tree it was always meant to be, and not a stunted copy of the pines that surround it. This is not individualism, which is a mere inflation of the ego and its desires. Rather, it is the very opposite, a humble submission to the archetypal blueprint of one's own soul, a reconciliation between the conscious ego and the vast, unknown self. The individual who has ceased pleasing everyone has not done so to become an island of defiant isolation, but to clear the sacred space necessary for this deeper, more authentic connection to the whole to emerge. For one cannot be truly related to another until one is first related to oneself. The pleaser, enmeshed in the collective, is like a thread that has lost its own fiber, existing only to be woven into another's pattern. The individuating soul, in contrast, discovers its own unique thread, its texture, its color, its strength, and only from this place of solidity can it then engage in a tapestry of relationship without losing its distinct identity. This is the reconciliation of opposites within the crucible of one's own being. The softness of the sensitive soul is not erased, but is now tempered by the forged steel of the integrated shadow. The capacity for empathy is not abandoned, but is now guided by the lamp of inner wisdom, rather than the mirror of external demand. The goal is wholeness, not goodness. It is to embrace the full spectrum of one's humanity, the light and the dark, the saint and the sinner, the strength and the vulnerability, without denying any part of it. This is a sacred and profoundly personal responsibility, a duty to the cosmos to realize this one, unique spark of consciousness in its totality. The individuated person is thus a true individual, indivisible, a unity. They are a microcosm of the world, containing their own conflicts and their own resolutions. They stand in the world with a quiet authority that does not need to shout, for it is rooted in the bedrock of self-knowledge. They have become who they are, and in doing so, they have fulfilled the secret commandment of their own nature. They are a living answer to the question the gods never cease to ask of humanity: have you lived? Have you become what you are? This is the ultimate fruit of the sensitive soul's struggle, not a life free from pain or conflict, but a life that is authentically, unbearably, and gloriously their own. This sacred responsibility is the great and terrible burden that is simultaneously the key to liberation, a complete transvaluation of what the sensitive soul has always believed duty to be. For their entire life, they have labored under the crushing weight of a responsibility for the inner states of others, for their happiness, their comfort, their approval, their emotional equilibrium. They have acted as an unpaid and unacknowledged psychic custodian, believing it their solemn task to manage the emotional ecosystem around them, to smooth over conflicts, to absorb displeasure, to preemptively solve problems before they could cause another a moment of distress. This was a responsibility born not of love, but of a deep, archetypal fear, the fear of the wrath of the gods, translated into the modern fear of rejection, of abandonment, of being cast out from the tribe for failing in one's placatory duties. It is an endless, thankless, and impossible task, for no single soul can command the tumultuous seas of another's inner world. But the journey through the void and the confrontation with the shadow reveals a terrifying and magnificent truth, that this entire structure was an inversion of a sacred order. The true, the only responsibility that carries the mark of the divine, is not responsibility for others, but responsibility to the self. This is not a call to hedonism or callous indifference. It is, in fact, a far more demanding discipline. It is the responsibility to heed the call of one's own destiny, to honor the promptings of the soul, no matter how inconvenient, to protect the fragile sprouts of one's own unique potential, to speak the truth that must be spoken even when the voice trembles, and to remain faithful to the slow, inner process of becoming whole. It is to recognize that you are the sole custodian of a mysterious and unfolding destiny, a singular vessel for a fragment of the world's consciousness, and that to fail in this duty, to allow your unique light to be extinguished for the sake of another's temporary comfort, is the only true sin against the Holy Ghost, the creative spirit of life itself. This sacred responsibility demands that you make your psyche a sanctuary, not a public thoroughfare. It requires you to discern between the compassionate act of helping and the self-betraying act of enabling, between the generosity that flows from abundance and the self-sacrifice that drains the very core of your being. When you accept this charge, your relationships are utterly transformed. You can now approach others not as a servant tasked with their happiness, but as a sovereign soul engaging another sovereign soul. Your love becomes conscious, chosen, and potent, because it is given from a place of fullness, not extracted from a place of lack. You realize that the greatest gift you can possibly offer the world is not your compliance, but your wholeness. For a world filled with whole, individuated beings, each taking radical responsibility for their own inner state and their own unique purpose, is a world that has moved a step closer to its own redemption. This is the final, sacred bargain. You are responsible for tending your own flame. In doing so, you cease to be a problem to be managed by others and become, instead, a source of genuine light. So, take heart, brave soul. The loneliness you fear is the anteroom of your sovereignty. The conflict you avoid is the forge of your character. When you stop pleasing everyone, you do not find emptiness.